we message to white women. So Jackie, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you. It is so nice to be here with y'all. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm delighted to learn what you all are doing and happy to support in any way that we can. As Finale said, my name is Jackie Payne. I'm the founder and executive director of Galvanize USA, Galvanize Action, and I also have a PAC, the One for All Committee. And as she said, what we really are doing here in Galvanize Action is trying to figure out how we can help move the margins among white women so that we can join folks, communities of color, progressive, youth folks, really anyone who wants progress in America to come together to build a multiracial coalition for progress. And that's our mission, and I am just delighted to be here to talk to you today. I'm going to do a little bit of setup so you see where we come from, how we know, and how we figured out what we figured out. But then I also am going to try to help apply it to the everyday sort of conversations and the deep canvassing that I know many of you are doing. So let me start just by acknowledging where we are in this country right now. We know that our democracy is very fragile. We're right on the edge of, I'm sorry, let me just try to get my screen to go. There we go. Oops. We're really right on the edge of losing this very fragile democracy. And that this is happening here in the US, but it is also part of a global phenomenon, right? So the rise of fascism and authoritarianism that we are seeing globally is happening here in the US, and it's being brought about through the use of grievance-based disinformation and a really ugly backlash on equity. And that disinformation and that backlash is being targeted at movable white folks who the extreme right thinks that they can drag to the right with them using those mechanisms. Because white women are the largest voting bloc, and in fact, white voters are projected to make up 73% of the midterm voters, we know we have to do better with these voters if we want to avoid a continued fall into authoritarianism and the loss of all of these rights that we hold so dear and that we're watching go by the wayside right now. We were created to fill this gap to counter what the right is doing. So if the extreme right is targeting moderate white voters using this kind of grievance-based disinformation designed to trigger unconscious racial resentment and internalized sexism, we were designed to counter that, to offer a positive, hopeful, progressive alternative that actually works to target those same voters and give them an alternative path. And we do that by using neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and data science to find, connect with, and move moderate white women voters to help strengthen our democracy and to advance and defend progress for everyone. So today, that's our focus. We're going to kind of go through the how of that and how you can use it. I always like to just acknowledge why white women. So throughout my career, I started my career in Johannesburg, South Africa at the end of apartheid. I worked at Planned Parenthood. I worked at Now Legal Defense and Education Fund. I've often worked in places that were, extremely progressive and focused on gender, racial, and economic justice. So most of my career has been spent focused on centering the most marginalized. So it's definitely a shift to say, now I'm going to try to focus my energies on moderate white women who are not yet with us. But the reason for that is because of the sheer scale of white women voters, the sheer scale of white voters nationally, and the outsized influence white voters have over national elections, over who wins the Senate, over who takes that White House, right? So in the 4 states that we are rooted in, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, across those 4 states, white women make up 45% of the vote, and white folks make up the vast majority of the vote. In Virginia, as you'll see in a minute, white women's vote share is about 42%. So it's difficult, if not impossible, to try to advance and sustain progress without moving these margins to bring more white women into a durable, multiracial, pro-democracy majority. Okay, so that's the why. We really do our work by extreme focus, really understanding and connecting with white women who are movable because they share some of our small p progressive values. They envision a world that does work for both their children and for everyone's children, right? So they're with us on a lot of the values, and they have not made up their mind. They're not strongly rooted in one party or the other, and so they are persuadable. So, and we do that by working at the intersection of neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and data science, which the neuroscience helps us figure out how do people make decisions, how do they process information, how can we work with the brain rather than try to go against the brain's defenses that just shuts out new information. Behavioral psych helps us understand the hidden drivers behind political behavior, what really motivates that behavior change. And the data science is a really rigorous data analysis and modeling, regression analysis to figure out exactly who are the right voters, who we have. It's a worthwhile investment to try to reach and move. So we combine all three of those to effectively target our audience and understand them, figure out what their core values are, what motivates them, what moves them, and then design messages and communications that really do resonate with them, that help them to self-persuade and that act as an inoculation against that grievance-based disinformation that threatens to drag them to the extremes and our whole country apart, right? So using that data science, we were able to find 11.4 million persuadable white women across the country. And you can see from this visualization in the map where the concentration is, right? So this is the percentage of the vote share of our target audience across the country from high to low of those 11.4 million women. Those are the women who the extreme right is targeting and we're targeting, and we're in a battle to see who can offer them a more persuasive path towards the future of America. In Virginia, we found almost 800,000 persuadable white women in Virginia. First, let me show you on the right-hand side, you can see the electorate makeup here on the right, and you can see white women make up about 42%. And then look at how huge the white block is, right? So we have got to do better with white voters if we want to consistently advance and sustain progress. As I said, we have about 800,000 target voters in Virginia. They make up roughly 14% of the Virginia voting electorate. Just for context, Youngkin won by less than 64,000 votes, right? So this is, almost more than 12 times the margin you would need to have defeated Youngkin, which is a great group to be working with, right? And as a reminder, white women overall voted for Youngkin, but they were about 57% for Youngkin, and white non-college women went even higher for him. Around 74% of that population went for Youngkin. So they're disproportionately weighting towards a candidate like Youngkin, and we have the opportunity to move them to make the change we want to see. So if you take a deeper look at Virginia, what I've done here with my team is look at, okay, what is true about the folks in Virginia? If you exclude the people that we have reflected here as deep red Trump conservatives and deep blue liberal progressives, those other three middle groups from the sort of teal to the rose, those folks are our target audience. They make up the segments of white women voters who we have reason to believe we could persuade and create movement. Once we identify the target audience, then we say, what is true about them? Like, what do we need to know to understand them? And we always start with what their core values are. So we work with this amazing firm who has done this analysis with us of the core values of the entire electorate. We're able to segment this population and say, okay, we need to take this group of traditionalist conservatives, and we need to understand who they are in Virginia. How does this group of folks show up? What do they value most? So for the traditionalist conservatives, which lean more conservative, they're highly, they value in-group care, emotionality, and then nostalgia is their third top value. They also highly value politeness and authority. So they're going to follow the rules. And they're distressed when the rules are, when they perceive the rules as being broken or turned upside down. Uncertain individualists, the group reflected as in the yellow, that tends to be our younger group of voters, the under 35s, who went about a third for Trump, a third for Biden, and a third didn't vote. Their core values, they also have emotionality and in-group care, but this group is a little bit different. They're a little bit higher in achievement and excitement and hedonism. These folks are trying to enjoy life. They are pretty nihilistic about the way things are going and whether voting even does anything. What they kind of feel like is you have to get yours while you can, but they can be connected with if you understand what their positive core values are and how to meet them there. And then the last group in the teal is the trusting liberals. Of the three groups, this one's the biggest of the three movable groups in Virginia. They also have in-group care and emotionality as their two of their core values. They're high in compassion, in patriotism, which is a value we have to reclaim on the left, and purity. And for them, the purity might show up in the context of organic yogurt or doing yoga, right? It could be that kind of purity, good for the earth, good for your body. Or for some of them, it might show up in a little bit more religious context. So understanding what that value means to this group helps us to connect with and message them. What we did over the last, oh my gosh, almost year now, was we went through all of the issues that we thought would be hot in this election year and that were part of the public narrative and part of the disinformation being targeted at these women and starting to shift their understanding and their worldview. So we said, what are those core issues? How can we look at our audience and say, let me understand through research, not just think about, not guess. Let's do research on every single issue. Let's understand how each group is processing that information. What's the lens they're looking at it through using their core values? How do they make sense of it in given their worldview? What motivates them? And what barriers do they see? And once we understand them, we're able to design messages on any topic that significantly moves them towards the more progressive position. And it's pretty stunning when you see these results. We have over 250 messages that we've tested in the lab. So we take this group of voters and we say, here's the control and here's the test message. And we see that when we show them, for instance, on climate change, we have messages, the best one moves voters 22 percentage points to be more supportive of climate innovation. And so for every issue, we're looking for what are the best messages, and we check to see, do they have any backfire? Is anything we're worried about? And we're able to see for that issue, what are the things that the extreme right is using that is working on that same issue, but is working for them, right? So how are they talking about immigration? How are they talking about socialism? In Virginia, how are they talking about critical race theory and wokeness and cancel culture? How are they talking about crime now? So, and what we see is for the right, what they do is tap into these, to racial resentment, to fear around safety and stability, to some internalized sexism, and a lot of othering, blaming the other. And so that's how they're able to start to move voters, these same voters, to the right. But we're able to connect with them by knowing, okay, you care, your values are high in in-group care and emotionality, which means you need a story that centers your family first and then moves out from there. We know who the trusted messengers are and the values frame that resonates. So we're able to think about maybe if you're high in compassion, how can I frame a message in a way that meets you at your value of compassion or nostalgia, and thinks about the messenger who's going to be the best messenger for you. So for a lot of our folks, effective messengers are those who are authority figures. Especially for more conservative voters, if the messenger is a police officer or a military or a doctor or a small business owner, someone who is perceived as being a winner, someone who is the top of an authority, they're going to be very effective messengers for this population. Similarly, moms can be very effective at conveying messages around their area of perceived authority, protecting children, protecting the family, following the rules. So if you think about even something like gun safety, if you think about what is a mom's perceived sphere of authority, it may not be around in the technical sphere of which kinds of guns, what are the right kinds of regulations that we should have to limit how many rounds the gun has, because the guns are perceived as tools, which goes into the sort of male sphere, using this internalized sexism frame. So if that goes into the male sphere, what goes into the women's sphere of authority? And in the gun context, what it's protecting the psychological well-being of their children. So in that context, we can see, if you talk about the fact that our children are having to do these drills, that they're terrified, that they're having nightmares, that's a more effective way in, because you're thinking about what is your value in group care, emotionality, who can I trust on this? A mom in her area of expertise, children's mental health, as opposed to maybe the gun rules, right? So really carefully, deeply doing this research to understand how to connect with the voter and meet her where she is, using her message frame to get to the progressive outcome. That's really our secret sauce.
So Jackie, if I could jump in for a second before you go on, if you could go back that page with all of those things on it. So for us here, so some of them, there's a lot of messages, and some of them there's like one book banning, but it's 25 points. So this messaging, whether it comes digital or whether it's a postcard, I know you guys are doing some special postcard stuff here in Virginia. Can you just talk about that for a minute? And when you talk about the number of points that it moves, can you talk about what that actually looks like?
Yeah, so let me show you, I'm gonna pop ahead a couple. So let me see if I can find it. We do postcards, we do all these digital ads, but mostly
it's hard to know.
Do these persuasion ads. Let's see if I can find it for you, sorry.
There was a time when Americans used to...
We basically go and meet the voter where she is. So a lot of the ads we do and that our allies do are digital ads, where they might take the ad and send it to them if they're watching a show on TV. So we do the research to say, oh, these voters who are movable, they want like reruns of Friends. So we'll send these 30-second or 15-second digital ads that work with those voters, and they're the streaming 6-second ad that you have to watch before you can watch your show. And then what we find is that our voters are interested in the ad we created, so they actually watch the whole thing. We're well above the industry standard of people sticking and actually watching the ad. We also do postcards. So we had a whole randomized control trial that we did this past spring, where we were using our very best tested memes and GIFs that we created, and we turned them into postcards. So you can see this example of a paid family leave ad that did very well. Here we're using women in the military. And so taking the authority of the military to talk about it. And we had volunteers join us in writing to our target audience and saying on the back, like, this really resonated, you know, this means a lot to me. This happened to me when I was a mom, and I really think we should have this, right? So meeting them at the in-group care, at the compassion. But the hardest thing we find for our volunteers is we tend to want to talk to people the way that we would want to be talked to. We tend to want to argue or fact battle or use what's resonant with us. But if you're farther on the spectrum towards more progressive, if you found yourself in the very dark blue box that we talked about, you have a different core value structure where that's not going to be the thing that resonates with you the most. You probably are very persuaded by an equality frame or a fairness frame. You want to hear what the Constitution should say the right should be, what should be equal and fair for people. It's a little bit more up here as an argument, intellectual and justice, equality based. Whereas the more effective approach for these voters is a little bit more around let me imagine my daughter or granddaughter or aunt and think about how I think she should be treated. Okay, this is what I think should be true for her. Now, how do I expand this out, right? So we have to work with our volunteers and remind ourselves constantly to meet the voter where she is and to message to her in a way that is proven effective. So we did a whole series where we sent out those postcards out to folks. We also do the same digital ads on social media, and folks can take them and use them and send them through Facebook, etc. And we do it in other online content as well. As I said, we test everything in the lab first. So we take 1,000 or 2,000 voters and we send half the control and half the message. And then we ask them both the same question. So on paid family leave, do you think the government should have mandatory 12 weeks paid family leave, right? And we're looking to see if you got the control, what's your answer? You might be at 60%. And if you saw our message, what's your answer? You might be at 72% or 82%, right? And so it's that shift, the difference that we identify as statistically significant. Once we know that it works in that lab setting, we then test it. We create the ads, or we do the postcards, and then we test it in the field. Does it work in real life? Is it effective there? And then on top of, so we do the same kind of measurement in real life. And then we also have a tracking poll where every 2 weeks, we track 3,000 women and we see how do their answers change over time. If they're given our messaging over time, are we able to persuade them and convince them to shift in their position? So we have all those different forms of testing and tracking to make sure it really does work.
Right. So I think the important takeaway here is when the postcards or whatever the ad is, and you say, this is the way we need to message this, then we trust that the data has been scientifically reviewed to say, even though it's not what I would want to say, it's what's going to work on these women.
Right, exactly. And we wouldn't waste our money or anyone else's on running ads that aren't proven effective. And as you say, like, we just have to underscore so often. It doesn't matter if we like it. We test to make sure it won't backfire, right? We don't want to make an ad that if it goes viral, will have a backlash among liberal or progressive folks. So we always test that to make sure there's no backlash. But what we find is most of our ads, it's just like a meh among liberal and progressive folks, but among our target audience, it's highly, highly effective. And those are the ones that we create. So if you'd like, I can show you a couple of the ads across issues so you can get a flavor of the different types of ads and what works. Is that,
absolutely.
You want to see some of those?
Absolutely.
So here's one that was done on reproductive freedom. This was done using a volunteer of ours who, like some of you on this call, she did deep canvassing with us and postcarding. She's a volunteer who's wonderful from Illinois. So we picked her to do a spot. Part of the reason we picked her is because she is a white grandmother. So we're using a neuro hack around salience here. So we're targeting older white voters who will see themselves in her immediately. And so that's her face shows up first for that neuro hack principle, right? We want them to say, oh, she's someone like me. So we're using that. And then what we're doing in this ad is tapping into, see if you can hear it. It's in-group care and emotionality and compassion. And then recognizing that many of the folks who are movable on abortion right now are fairly religious, not evangelical, but they might be there's a lot around Catholics that are movable. So we tried to tap into that as an opportunity here. So let me just show you this one and we could talk about them.
My faith teaches me to have compassion for the complex decisions that each person must make in their life. I believe that the decision to become a parent is deeply personal, and that a woman has the right to make reproductive decisions with her doctor, her family, and her faith. It's not my place or the government's to tell her what to do.
So for people who are less likely to turn out in the midterms, this moved them 18 percentage points. And for moderate voters who are more likely to turn out, but who are moderate, it moved them 12 percentage points. And you can see how we tapped into that. And even bringing in her husband in the end is reinforcing the notion of in-group care. My family feels this way. This is an acceptable thing to think. I'm not in tension with anyone, which is a part of the barriers that we're trying to move through. And so here's a slightly different one, again, looking at compassion and in-group care. And again, it worked very well, moving folks 18 percentage points.
When I first got pregnant, my husband and I were so excited. But then I lost the pregnancy. I still think about and grieve that loss, and I'm so grateful that I was able to later have my daughter. I was treated with care and dignity during that difficult time, and that's what all women deserve, whether they're dealing with a miscarriage or an abortion. I want my daughter to grow up in a world free from judgment, where she has the support to make the best decisions for her future.
So what you're seeing there is, that's a true story. Our actors, quote unquote, are real people telling their real stories. That's her real husband and daughter there. And why it resonates with folks, right? It's taking abortion and putting the context of the full spectrum of reproductive health. It's saying the viewer sees a lot of compassion for someone who's had a miscarriage, immediately connects with her, and then joins her in saying, yeah, I think folks deserve care and dignity, right? And I want my daughters, the next generation. So looking at in-group care there, right? And what we're doing is sidestepping the question of whether or not you ever think you would have an abortion. Because for most folks can't imagine themselves having an abortion, and it's just a very attenuated idea for them. It's not super present. It's not a today problem. So most folks aren't so sure what they would think. They mostly don't want to think about it. So here what we're doing is sidestepping that whole internal debate and saying, you may not be so sure about that, but what you are absolutely sure about is if someone you love was in this situation, you know what you would want for her. Right. And so in this case, you know what you would want for your daughter. And folks are pretty clear about that. These choice ads, we created them before the decision came down. So, but at the time we anticipated the decision. And so we had these volunteers do different endings so that we could edit them. And they now say, now that the Supreme Court, right? So they're current to this present moment. So we're able to use them now. But having those ads done early meant that the minute that the decision was leaked, we were able to get into the field and talk to voters in the weeks before the final decision happened, so we could begin to socialize them on before it all comes down, how do you really feel about this issue? What are your values? What kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person who wants to take care of others, who wants them to have a healthcare with dignity? You know, are you on, which side are you on? So we're helping them in a very soft and values-based way identify where they want to be before the decision even comes down. But as I'll show you in a few minutes, most of the folks that we're going to be trying to persuade to vote with us, they won't become single issue abortion voters. We can't only talk to them about choice. We partner with a lot of other single issue organizations. So with Planned Parenthood and NARAL, and Emily's List is doing a lot of reproductive messaging, and that's fantastic and important, and we're delighted that they're in there. Our folks are increasingly clear on how they feel about it, but abortion is not their 1, 2, or 3 issue. They won't be single issue voters. So how do we talk to them about the issues that are top of mind for them and make sure that we're talking about abortion in that context, and hopefully make sure that at a minimum, they won't vote for someone who is not standing with us in abortion, but they have to be, it has to be put to them in the context of everything they care about, right? So economy, healthcare, etc. I wanted to show you all.
When I first got pregnant, my husband and I were so excited.
I'm gonna try to show you, because of, in Virginia, CRT was pretty infamous, right? You all were the early days on how would critical race theory play out in an election. And clearly it wasn't the only issue, and there are many issues at play, but we watched at the end of that race, of that governor's race, we watched as the extreme right politicized public education, racialized it by making critical race theory an issue where the woke left was coming in to get your children, right? This false notion that there was this extreme ideology being targeted at your kids and triggering both internalized racial resentment, but also triggering that in-group care and desire to protect one's children. So they very effectively weaponized that issue. For us, we were doing some work with volunteers from Virginia. In the spring of that year, we had gone out and said, like, let's go understand this issue more. Once we identify who was movable and what their core values were, we also wanted to listen, not assume, not, imagine, but actually listen and understand. How are they processing the issue? So we had a group of volunteers trained in the art of essentially deep canvassing do calls with us into Wisconsin and talk to our target audience of women and say, let's talk about critical race theory. We didn't actually use that frame, but words, but we were talking about race and discrimination in schools. And what we found through that listening project was how voters were responding to the issue. And what we saw was first, that they perceived themselves as people who were for equality, right? So that's important, how their self-perception's critical. The second is that they believe that to get to equality, color blindness is the key. So they were taught and continue to be under the impression that the way you judge someone should be on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. They don't think talking about race is a good thing. They think it's just going to make things worse. And a lot of our folks are super conflict avoidant. And they also, they worry both for their own children or grandchildren, their white children, right? How they'll be made to feel, but then also worry for kids of color and how will they be made to feel in this. So they're able to hold a view of self as not being racist, right? They're worried about everybody, but they're particularly worried about their sons. And this is where the combination of race and gender come together for a bunch of our moms. And what we see is while they have some confidence that their daughters will be fine, they're particularly worried about their white sons being made to feel shame simply because they are little white men in America, right? They believe that the world is changing, that things are going less well for white men in America, and that their son will be punished or shamed simply because of who he is through no fault of his own. So we saw that happening a lot, and we thought, okay, how can we work with their values of nostalgia, patriotism, and in-group care, connect with them on those, and help address some of these concerns around, should I talk about race or not? And what about my white son? So this ad was our best testing ad. And this one, I'm actually the actor because it's a true story of my grandfather, and I couldn't get my sister to do it for me. So here you can watch how this ad does with this target audience.
When my grandfather's B-17 bomber was shot up in World War II, he and his crew were saved by the Tuskegee Airmen, an all-black segregated unit. Pop always said those guys never got the respect they deserved, and he urged us kids to always stand up against discrimination. We need to learn from our past so we can continue to make our country great. That's why I support teachers being able to talk with our kids about race and discrimination in a fair and honest way. I know my pop would want that.
Okay, so pretty obvious use of nostalgia and patriotism and in-group care. What we see there is Republicans who saw this were 26 percentage points more likely to support talking about race and discrimination in schools after seeing this versus the control group. And folks who voted for Trump in 2020 were 21 percentage points more likely. So highly, highly effective by meeting them at their values and using their frame to come to the conclusion that we all want to see, which is, really making this world better for all of our kids. I know that most of you aren't going to go out and do ads, right? So I'm trying to show you through the use of the ads, how are we carefully tailoring our conversation with folks by really listening, understanding, and meeting them where they are in a way that connects with them and they can hear. Sorry, did you have a...
When my grandfather's...
Yeah, I was going to say, when we looked at...
It's hard to know the right thing.
We had Target Smart, and they talked about critical race theory and what effect it had on voters in Virginia. And in the western part of the state, all of it, it was older white women. And so this is really the kind of thing that would really resonate in certain parts of the state. So this is really excellent for us.
Thank you. I just skipped two other ones that are related, which I can always go back and look at it if we have time, but I know I want to make sure we have time for conversation discussion. So I'm going to skip those two and just show you, this is how every 2 weeks we're tracking movement among our target audience. And this is among women in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And here's just looking at abortion. What we see is the top concerns are still economy, healthcare, and crime. And then after that, abortion is coming up the ladder. So previously it was like 9th on the list of things they cared about. So it really is coming up to like number 4, which is wonderful. But it is not hitting the top 3. And so it has to be understood in the context of everything going on in their lives. All right, so I just wanted to offer you that. So while we do have a bunch of ads and messaging that we do, and when you talk to folks, if you talk to them about reproductive freedom, I would use that frame, thinking about military authority, messaging, nostalgia, right? I would talk about reproductive freedom and the desire to be free from control of the government. We can get them to come with us, but how do we also get them to think about that issue in the context of the other things they say are important to them, so that when they vote, they are voting for candidates who will support all those issues. I think I'm just going to mention to you, for overall, it's economy, healthcare, crime, and then abortion. But we are also seeing an increase around immigration, which won't surprise you because for a lot of the extreme right, they're connecting crime with a lack of security and with immigration. And they're also connecting concerns about the economy and jobs with immigration, right? And so what you see is immigration is used as this bludgeon of, let's make immigrants the other who we can blame for the things that are scaring us. So whether it's lack of a job or concerns about crime, let's create them as the other. So that's what's effectively being used. That creates that internalized racism, that fear. We see lots, and you will continue to see lots around crime and immigrants. You probably will also, if you haven't already, see an evolution in critical race theory to an expanded attack within the context of public education. So we'll see gender ideology becoming the thing that we're talking a lot more about now in schools. So I anticipate a shift from the race-based CRT to a gender-based claims that teachers are grooming children, more concerns about trans folks in school, more concerns about gay teachers in school, more concerns about sex ed as being inappropriate, and this very woke leftist force coming for our children. So I'd anticipate seeing that kind of attack. And whether or not you're seeing it, these voters are definitely being indoctrinated with it, right? It's in their Facebook feed, they're seeing it. So part of the problem with this polarized America is lots of times we don't even know what the story is that we're being told versus what others are being told. Sometimes when I sit in focus groups, I'm shocked to hear that people in the focus group all have the same story that they saw on Fox News, and that's what's the image that's coming up for them, but it's definitely not what was on CNN or MSNBC. And so we're talking about the same thing from very different worldviews and sets of information. So a big part of the work is to say, all right, let's take all that away and let's understand where you're coming from so I can connect with you on these shared values.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to show you one ad that my PAC did, because I want you to see, given what I said about how abortion, where it fits in the hierarchy, we, even as we're doing ads to talk about that issue, we also need to be connecting with our voters on the things that they say they care most about, which is economy and healthcare, and persuading them that the candidates who are running, we have to talk to them about who has your back. Who is out there working for you versus for the other guy. So here's an example of an ad we did for Tim Ryan in Ohio that is similar to what could be used for other candidates.
There was a time when Americans used to come together without worrying what party somebody was. Nowadays, everyone is so divided, folks barely take time to listen anymore. I'm just sick of politicians shouting and making things worse. I want leaders who focus on what's important, making sure we have good jobs that pay a fair wage and let us take care of our families. I'm voting Tim Ryan for Senate because he's a man of character who cares about Ohioans. I trust him to look out for what really matters to me and my family.
So when we tested that ad, what we saw was people who voted Republican, identifies Republican, this increased their favorability of Tim Ryan by 17 percentage points. For Trump voters in 2020, it was 16 percentage points. Those voters are critical for a Democrat to win in Ohio, so being able to pull some of those folks over. Similarly, when we asked, would you cast a vote for Tim Ryan in the Senate elections? People who voted for Trump moved 20 percentage points in their likelihood that they would do that. And people who identify as conservative moved 15 percentage points. So we're able, through this kind of approach, to really do that connection that is getting through some of the very strong partisanship that's driving us apart.
There was a time when Americans used to come together.
We already talked about that. So very quickly, this is an example. I showed you the critical race theory ad. This is the text of that ad. And what we did was just, we're showing here how we're listening always for, when we're doing all the research, what are the core values that we need to be connecting with and message to, and how can we craft our messages, whether it's an ad like this or in a conversation with someone that does meet those values and creates that resonance, so the voter feels like, oh, this person shares some understanding of who I am, they see me, they can connect to me. I think for now, I'm going to skip that one because I want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to think about how to use this in your work. So this is just pulling from some of our deep canvassing principles that we used in 2020, and that is extremely effective. I was actually taught deep canvassing by Planned Parenthood of Northern New England. They taught me how to deep canvass on abortion back in 2018. And it worked for that issue then, and it really works across issues. And the way to do it is, number one, connect with the person, right? Number two, be vulnerable yourself. When you are vulnerable, when you tell a story, when you keep it real and human and heart-based, people, there's a neurological desire to reciprocate. So if you are vulnerable, people will want to reciprocate that vulnerability, which drops them out of a fighting stance and into a vulnerable stance. Share stories, talk about someone you know who had this experience. What happened to your child? What happened to your aunt? When you tell stories, it keeps it emotional. There's no way to fact battle a story. This is actually what happened in my experience to this person, which means you won't get into these arguments about facts when we have different sets of quote unquote facts, right? And we know from all the work on persuasion that facts do not persuade. Emotion persuades, connection persuades. Do not fact battle. Stay curious. This is an important part of the work. As we're more and more polarized, it's very easy for us to other them, right? So we can make this, whoever we're talking to, whoever's door we're knocking on, we can make them a scary other, where we have stories in our head about their tattoos or who they are or what they think. And what that does is undermines the whole effort. So stay curious, listen for underlying values, whatever the argument someone gives you. Well, when they say, well, I just don't think you should have multiple abortions. The value there is, I think people should be responsible, right? When I hear responsible, I think, oh, where can I take responsible? How can I work with that value instead of arguing over, well, the facts are about this many people have this many multiple abortions, so isn't that a blah, 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 right? That's fact battling. I want to listen for what's going on for the person underneath the fact battle. Meet them where they are as much as possible at the values that they're sharing with you, so you can connect, so they feel seen and it resonates. And once you connect, especially on in-group care and compassion, then you can I think of it as joining the person and walking down a path together towards the more progressive solution. Because most people want, the people we are targeting, the folks we call and postcard to and send stuff to, they want an America that does work better for everyone. They're just getting two very competing stories about what's the way towards it. So we have to be able to do a good job, as good a job as the extreme right does, as offering them a different journey and being willing to go on it with them. If you want to get more information about all of what I've shared with you, I want to make sure you know about our playbook. We've put almost all of our research, our ads, anything that is proven to work goes up on this website that we have. And some of our stinkers that didn't work, we put up there too, because we want to keep it real about, we thought this would work, but it didn't. What's our assessment of why it didn't? So we're trying to really learn with the field. So I want to encourage you to go to our playbook and take a look. I'm going to stop there, stop sharing, and see if we want to chat for a little bit.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. The very first question, well, it's not the first one, but one of them, that because you just talked about it. Can you talk a little bit about in-group care? Because we talk about in-group care. What does it mean to a person? What values are we talking about with in-group care?
Yeah, in-group care, really, the simplest way to think about that is you're starting with you're starting with the people you care most about. So your family, your community, and then you go out from there. If you don't want to start with rights-based conversation, what someone else deserves, someone far, far away, you start with the people closest to us in group, and then we expand that compassion to the larger group.
Okay. All right, I think so. So then my next question is that all the information, CO put it in the chat where you can go to the playbook that has all of the information that you talked about tonight. And it even has where it's interactive, where you can just sort of put in some other kinds of whatever specific information you're looking for on other groups. You can see that too, right?
Right, exactly.
All right, I'm making sure that I'm not missing any questions. Oh, okay, cool. So anybody else, and guys, you don't have to talk in the chat. If you've got something, you can raise your hand and I will find you and let you ask your question or something you want more clarification on.
Okay, good. My hand is raised. You see it?
Okay, good.
My little white hand there.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Go ahead, dear.
Hi. So thank you so much. This was really great. This was really great. Very inspiring. I immediately thought about Elaine Luria and CD2 with your sort of economy, healthcare, military, values, patriotism. That black and white thing was very impressive to me. I mean, what should we do in CD2?
Easy question.
Is that a group question for us, right? That's our work. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. A good ad for her using those same values in there would be great.
Now, is that something actually, Jackie, that do you do that? Do you compose these ads, put them together, place them? Do you do placements, all of that sort of thing? I was kind of curious because I didn't know about all those pre-roll ads and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the Galvanize Action, which is our C4, does all of the ads that are everything except the ads that say vote for Tim Ryan, right? Those ones were actually independent expenditures saying vote for a specific candidate. I do out of my PAC, and only in states where we make a decision to go in and play. So we're doing that in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. We did that in 2020 for the presidential. We'll do that again. We have our C4, or the Galvanize Action, has the ad I showed you for Ryan. I have another version of that ad that is more generic. It doesn't say vote for Tim Ryan. It says vote for, I'm only going to vote for someone who is like this, right? And that can work up and down a ticket for around those core values. But frankly, when we test them, it's better if it says the candidate's name.
Okay. And we can probably talk about it offline for what we want to do, because I think we'll want to do some other stuff. But I'm going to go to Manjula next, and then April.
Thank you. This is Manjula. Thank you so much, Jackie. This is excellent, excellent research and messaging. Like a lot of people, I'm a strong Democrat, but frustrated many times. And I yell at TV. My husband keeps saying they can't hear you. So the messaging part. So a couple of comments I want to offer. I do think that Dems need to do better, and you're working on it. The economy and healthcare. Dems are the ones who made tremendous progress over the time in those two areas. But we don't talk about it. And they are the issues that concern the most people. So that's one of my comments. The other comment about messaging about the progress we have made, both in terms of racial equalities. And my opinion, I think it goes better. You talk about the progress we have made and still the challenges. So I think it also helps not to make, especially you brought up the white voice and shaming, and that could be an issue. I could see that. And maybe, that needs to be a little bit, we need to be sensitive about the progress too. And as you can see, I'm a brown, I'm an immigrant. And I can't say every experience, I don't think I had any racial biases, but I am not a typical person in terms of my experience education. So I understand, but I think we need to be messaging a little bit positive, and still the challenges and progress we need to make. And the third comment I have, I can relate to this, is we use the mind more than our heart when we connect. I have this challenge even with my own friends. So facts are not the thing, but I am still learning how to connect at emotional level, and that's not easy. And we need training to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I concur with everything you said. And I think the second point is especially important. It's frequently the case that the right will use fear because fear divides. We need to use hope because hope unites. That's why it worked so well for Obama, right? And I often have people say to me, why are your ads so soft? Why aren't they harder? We have to do what the right is doing. And I'm like, well, let me tell you how that's going to work. The fear drives people, this population. In that fear, you retreat, you get tighter, you get more conservative, and you look for an authoritarian figure to keep you safe. So sometimes it can work in this very short term, fear can work, but it doesn't work in the long term to build a more abundant, expansive, progressive, loving electorate. So I'm 100% with you on hope and progress, and give people something they can be for.
And then on that, you put it so well, we all are Americans. We are all Americans first. We all love this country, and we want to be together and keep moving forward. And talk about that, I think, helps people, and doesn't mean that we downplay the challenges we have, especially in criminal justice and inequalities. But I think it can be done both. Thank you so much again. Excellent, excellent.
Thank you.
So Jackie, before we move on to April, I want to ask a question, not ask a question, but just sort of confirm something here, which is, I think the way that I understood this training is that this is a very targeted, specific group that we're talking to. And so the group that we're talking to, the research has been done. Whether it is the data science that we're talking about, the behavioral science, these are all things that have been tested to say this is the group. So even though there might be some other things that resonate with me as a Black woman, this isn't going to turn me off, but you're not talking to me. This is a very specific audience that we're trying to connect with to move the vote, and the data has proven it to be successful, at least what we believe based on what you guys have done. Am I thinking about that right?
Exactly. And other folks need to have their target audiences and do their work with their messages. Like, it is going to take all of us, right? We definitely want to think about what's going to work best. And one of the things we do is not only look for backlash, but we look at if something we created for this population works for other folks. Like in Texas, we found our critical race theory ad I just showed you. That worked even better with Latinas, moderate Latinas. And we're like, huh. So we thought, let's give this to folks who are targeting moderate Latinas in Texas. That's wonderful. But I totally agree with you that what you want to do is think about who is your audience, what will work for them and not cause any harm. And in Virginia, you've got about 36% of your white women vote is in this group of women who are movable and who we've done the research on. These ads work for them.
Okay, perfect. April. Hi, it's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. And thank you so much, Jackie, for this. This is just fabulous, really, really engrossing material. I guess, though, I wanted to just back up and make sure that I was connecting the dots here. So originally, my question was going to be, how do you know that these issue ads make a difference for particular candidates? And I thought I heard you say, in response to some other comments, that they work, but they work better, or at least some of these ads actually do work better if they home in on a particular candidate, like the one for Tim Ryan. So I guess that still leaves me a little confused when you say this ad caused this target group to move 10 points, 20 points, 50 points. Move to do what? I mean, if these are not ads mostly for particular candidates, move them to just go vote at all, move them to do the research to figure out that, aha, this issue is a important issue for Elaine Luria, so I'll vote for her. We're relying on them to connect. Like, I don't understand. Move them to do what, given that these are issue ads?
Yeah. So what we do is connect with folks. It's year-round, ongoing work. So it's not just, political money comes in the last 8 weeks before an election. That's when people want to pay for the ad that says, for this candidate, I want to do this, right? All the money comes in at the end. So, but what's happening to these voters for the rest of the time? When they're not paying attention yet to the election, they're definitely being inundated, especially by the right, with persuasion messaging, using issues to try to move them to feel more connected to Republicans, to feel more conservative in their vote, to basically prime them. So when it comes time to say who to vote for, they're like, oh, well, that candidate is with me on critical race theory. He's going to protect my kids, right? So think about, it's all the stuff that happens before those last 8 weeks. So when I say they moved them, depending on the issue, it might be on reproductive freedom. We test on different metrics, like, do you support Roe v. Wade? Would you oppose a ban like the one in Texas? And we explain what it is. Would you give $5 for an abortion fund? So we're looking at, if they see this ad, what can we do to move them on that issue, right? And then, so those are all the issue-based ads. And what we're doing is helping them decide where they fit. So when the candidates, for its own sake, right? So if someone tries to now ban abortion in your state, we've done the work of telling these people, having them be like, oh, hell no, I'm not going to support that, right? So we're doing that work. But then also, if a candidate says, I won't, I'm going to stand up to protect reproductive freedom, now the person says, oh, that person connects with me. So we do issue-based ones. Then we do ones that say, I wouldn't vote for any candidate who didn't protect the environment, didn't protect reproductive freedom, right? And then and that's for political money. And then the last bucket, in some cases, we go in and do, that's why I'm voting for Tim Ryan, right? So specific ones. But think of it as different approaches of connecting with the voter using different kinds of money and along the journey.
Okay, that's very helpful. I really appreciate that. And I hope you'll consider, when it gets to that last part of the spectrum, supporting some of our Virginia candidates, because they need all the help they can get. I don't know if there's anything you can say about how you chose those other states. I mean, we're honored to have you share this with us tonight. But as you know, we've been primarily, not exclusively, but primarily focused on Virginia. So we'd love to have you here.
Yeah, I can say we aren't playing in Virginia, although I love the Virginia folks. I was in DC for about 15 years, so you're all a family. And then the Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where our volunteers, they did the calling with us for the critical race theory into Wisconsin. So they were wonderful. So I feel like I owe Virginia. We started in the Midwest because of the high proportion, the margins among white women, right? So the just higher number of white women. In Virginia, when we went and talked to folks in Virginia in 2020, folks were kind of like, oh, we're good. We're a diverse enough state. We think we'll be okay if we turn out folks of color. And there wasn't like a, yeah, come on in the same way. And so we said, okay, well, we're here if you want us, right? And that's always how I'll operate. If folks are not ready for us or don't want us, and we're always respect the folks on the ground first. I think people were pretty upset in 2021, and then we'll see if maybe there's an interest in this in the future. But even that, I would always look to see what's the difference we can make vis-a-vis other partners. How can we play? And we tend to play in federal races because of the national impact of the Senate and the White House. So we try to think about where we can be, that if I'm here, I can not only help with this Senate race, but think about what do I have to build for 2024. So.
Yeah, and I would also just like to add that you guys make everything available to us online through the playbook. And we get to do an extra call with you and Kristen to say, hey, here's some ads we want to talk about using, and then making those available to us too. So I know we'll have an opportunity to use everything that you make available. And so this team will definitely be doing that. I don't think I see any other questions. Catherine, is there anything that you wanted to say before I close up?
No, I mean, love it to have you again, Jackie. Thank you for your time. And I definitely think, like, with all these heads in the room, learning this, we can apply this now in our work. And I see Frederico here. Good to see you. Another messaging guy. So this is great. This is a great audience. It's just so helpful, Jackie. So thank you. Especially at the doors. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we were talking about, what that sounds like in the ad. That's the same thing that you take to the door when you're talking to someone. You can say, that's why I support Elaine Luria, because she really believes in the thing that you guys have just finished talking about. So these are all things that we can apply right at the door, just like we find what you talked about, the ads, getting familiar with the issues, your stories. It's all preparation. Perfect practice makes perfect. So go ahead, Catherine.
There's one thing that I think, and all of us, it really resonated with me, is we're in our bubble of information. And like Jackie said, people are getting all this other information, and it kind of does startle you when you go talk to other family members and they have a whole, and we know this, all of us, a different perspective. But really, I think in a lot of elections where we got behind is and when I say we, I'll say the Democratic Party have more understanding of what's going on in some of these races that we don't have the tools to get into, is we're not paying attention to what messaging was going in front of these voters to persuade them. And that goes with Youngkin, did a better job at outreaching to everybody and got those messages in that space. And we seeded that space. And I think for us, we're trying to move our party in Virginia to get ahead of that. That's a big problem. So, yeah.
All right. So, Frederico, did you want to say anything? Okay, he was just giving us thumbs up. So we're at the top of the hour, actually 7 minutes over.
I love Jackie's work and her organization. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So
they focus on science. I love their focus on science, incorporating science into political communication. I love it.
Me too. Dennis, I hope you picked up all the stuff that you were looking for. Did you get everything you needed?
I think so. Catherine, is there going to be a recording of this available?
Steers recording it. And then we'll be putting it up. So thank you, Dennis. There she is.
What?
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
All right. So now, sign us off, and then we're looking forward to next Monday, of course, and then we have the catch up on Thursday if anybody wants to join us at 12:30.
Thank you. We have the catch up on Thursday. Thank you so much. And I'm going to send out something for next Monday. I think it's called, let me see, Uplifting Messaging for the Soul. It's going to be next Monday. So, Jackie, thank you so much. I'm delighted for all the information that you've made available to us. Hopefully because you have a fond spot for us, you'll let us keep calling you and picking your brain for what else this group can do, because we believe that we can make a difference, and your work can help us do that.
Just great.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.